Okay, so you want to own a nightclub. You picture the velvet rope, the line stretching down the block in the cold while you walk straight past it, your name on the marquee, bottles sparkling under the lights, and cash rolling in every single weekend like clockwork. You imagine yourself standing near the door deciding who gets in and who doesn't, the whole city wanting a piece of the room you built. Sounds simple. It is not simple. You are not buying a party. You are buying a business with some of the thinnest margins, the shortest average lifespans, and the strangest legal structure of almost any industry in America, and most people who try this lose everything within their first 3 years. Let's start with what it actually costs just to get in the door, because this is where the fantasy meets the spreadsheet. Building a nightclub from scratch, in a mid-sized city, inside a raw warehouse or a former retail space, typically runs somewhere between $500,000 and $1.5 million once you account for a professional sound system, a lighting rig, a full bar build-out, kitchen equipment if you plan to serve food, security infrastructure, furniture, and interior design. That's the low to mid-tier of this industry, the version most new owners actually enter through. At the top end, a flagship venue in a major nightlife market like Las Vegas, Miami, or New York can run $10 to $30 million. Because at that level, you're not just building a room with speakers in it, you're building a full production stage set. Think about a club like Hakkasan or Omnia in Las Vegas. Venues that were built with production budgets, closer to what you'd spend mounting a Broadway show than opening a neighborhood bar. Complete with hydraulic stages, custom lighting programming, and celebrity DJ contracts built into the opening budget before a single customer walks in. That gap between the corner lot club and the flagship mega club is the entire industry compressed into one number. Same basic underlying product, a room, a bar, a dance floor, wildly different price of admission, and the thing that separates the tiers isn't luck or taste. It's location and licensing, which brings us to the part almost nobody warns you about before you sign anything. And that build-out budget almost never stays fixed once construction actually begins. Sound insulation alone, the acoustic treatment needed to keep bass frequencies from traveling into neighboring buildings, can add a substantial line item to even a modest build-out, and skipping it doesn't save you money, it just defers the cost into fines and legal disputes later. Permitting adds its own delay and expense on top of construction, because a venue serving alcohol to a large crowd typically needs separate sign-off from the fire marshal, the health department, and the local building department, each with its own inspection timeline, and each timeline running independently of the others rather than in parallel. A 6-month construction estimate routinely stretches to 9 or 12 months once all 3 agencies are involved, and every extra month is a month of rent paid on a space that isn't generating a single dollar of revenue yet. Before you spend a single dollar on lighting or sound, you need a liquor license, and this is where the real cost of entry hides quietly, off to the side of every glossy pitch deck for a new venue. In most states, liquor licenses aren't simply a matter of filling out a form and paying an application fee. Many states cap the total number of licenses available in a given city or county, a system usually called a quota license, designed originally to limit how many bars and clubs could operate in one area. When the government isn't issuing new licenses because the local quota is already full, you have to buy an existing license from someone who already holds one, on a private resale market that operates almost like a mini stock exchange for pieces of paper. And in dense urban quota states, that resale price can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, layered directly on top of everything else you're already spending on the physical space. You're not just buying permission to serve alcohol. You're buying a scarce, government-created asset whose price has almost nothing to do with your business plan, and almost everything to do with how many other operators in your city already got there first. And that license typically comes with its own recurring costs on top of the purchase price, an annual renewal fee, mandatory compliance training for staff who serve alcohol, and the ever-present risk that a single serious violation, serving a visibly intoxicated patron for instance, or serving past your legally permitted hours, can suspend or permanently revoke the license entirely, instantly turning a fully built-out venue into an empty room with no legal way to generate its primary source of revenue. Now let's talk about how ownership is actually structured once you clear that hurdle, because this is exactly where the hidden costs start piling up on top of each other. Most clubs lease their space rather than owning the real estate outright, which means you inherit whatever terms the landlord negotiated years before you arrived, while remaining personally exposed on the operating side in ways a typical retail tenant simply isn't. You inherit the building's existing sound insulation, or the lack of it, which quietly becomes a legal liability the moment nearby residents start filing noise complaints with the city. You inherit fire code occupancy limits, meaning a government inspector sets a hard, non-negotiable cap on how many paying customers you're legally allowed to let inside at once, no matter how long the line outside stretches down the block. Exceed that number on a busy night, and you're not just risking a fine, you're risking the license itself, the single piece of paper your entire business depends on. You inherit whatever security and insurance obligations your city imposes on venues serving alcohol past a certain hour, which in many markets means paying for off-duty police officers or state-licensed security staff as a legal condition of staying open past midnight. And you inherit deferred maintenance on HVAC and plumbing systems that were frequently designed decades earlier for retail foot traffic, never for 500 sweating bodies dancing at once, which means your air conditioning bill and your repair bill both come in far higher than anyone tells you during the walkthrough. None of this shows up in the glossy first tour of the space, when the lighting is dim and the broker is talking about foot traffic. It shows up quietly, invoice by invoice, over your first 6 months of actually operating. There's also a contractual trap specific to nightlife leases that catches new owners completely off guard. A co-tenancy or exclusivity clause buried in the fine print, meaning your landlord has quietly promised a neighboring tenant, sometimes a residential developer, sometimes another commercial operator, certain rights that limit what hours you can operate, how loud you can be, or even whether you can renew at all once your initial lease term expires. Because clubs are considered a higher-risk tenant category by many commercial landlords, leases in this category frequently come with shorter initial terms and steeper rent escalation clauses than a standard retail lease, meaning your rent isn't just high on day one, it's contractually guaranteed to climb every single year regardless of how your revenue is actually trending. So how does the money actually flow once the doors finally open? Revenue in a nightclub breaks into 3 distinct layers, and understanding the real split between them is essentially the entire business model in miniature. The first layer is the cover charge, the flat fee people pay just to get in the door. This is genuine revenue, but in most clubs, it's a surprisingly small fraction of total sales, often somewhere in the single digits up to maybe 15% of a night's total take, because the door exists more to control crowd flow and manufacture a sense of exclusivity than to generate serious income on its own. The second layer, and the one that actually keeps the entire operation solvent, is beverage sales, meaning ordinary drinks sold at the bar, and, in higher-end venues, bottle service, where a group reserves a table and buys a full bottle of liquor at a dramatic markup, often 5 to 10 times its retail price, in exchange for guaranteed seating and a visible spot on the floor. A bottle of vodka that costs the club maybe $20 to $30 wholesale can sell as bottle service for $300 to $600 or more inside a premium club on a peak night. And that markup, not the cover charge, is where nearly all of the club's actual profit margin lives. The third layer is private events and promoter deals, where the venue rents out its space for the night, or partners with an outside promoter who brings their own guest list and pays the club either a flat fee or a percentage of that night's total sales in exchange for using the room and its staff. Here's the counterintuitive detail that reframes how you should think about this entire business. The cover charge you pay at the door isn't really the product being sold. The table is the product. A single VIP table on a busy Saturday night with a bottle minimum attached can generate more revenue in one evening than 50 separate people paying cover charges combined. You're not really running a nightclub in the way the fantasy imagines it. You're effectively running a real estate leasing operation for premium square footage next to a dance floor, and the dance floor itself functions mostly as a marketing expense, the visual spectacle that makes the tables around it worth renting at all. Worked out across a single busy night, the math looks something like this. Say 200 people pay a $20 cover charge, that's $4,000. Real money, but a small slice of the total. Now say the club has 15 reserved tables, each with a bottle minimum of $800, and every table hits that minimum. That's $12,000 from 15 tables, 3 times what the entire cover-paying crowd generated combined, and that's before counting a single drink sold at the bar itself to everyone else on the floor. That's real money, And it's also the entire explanation for why every serious club redesigns its floor plan around maximizing table count long before it worries about maximizing dance floor space. Now for the other side of the ledger, because nightclub margins are famously thin, and this is exactly where the trap lives, hidden in a number that looks reassuring on the surface. Your major fixed costs are rent, which in a prime nightlife district can be extraordinarily high because you're competing directly with retail tenants for the same limited real estate. Staffing, which includes bartenders, door and floor security, coat check, and often DJs or live performers who are paid per appearance rather than a fixed salary. Insurance, which runs considerably higher than almost any other hospitality category because of liquor liability exposure, the legal risk that comes with serving alcohol to large crowds, and utilities because industrial sound systems, elaborate lighting rigs, and climate control for a room full of... Then there's the metric that looks healthy on the surface but actually hides real weakness underneath it. A packed line outside the door. A long line looks like success. It photographs well for social media. It makes for a good story. It reinforces the exclusivity that draws people in the first place. But a long line outside doesn't actually tell you what's happening inside the room. A club can have a line stretching down the block and still be losing money that same night, because the crowd waiting outside is often there for the free spectacle of being seen near a hot venue, not necessarily there to buy bottle service once they finally get past the rope. The metric experienced operators actually watch isn't attendance at all, it's average revenue per table and bar spend per head. A half-full room where nearly everyone is buying bottle service can meaningfully out-earn a fully packed room, where most people are nursing a single well drink for 3 hours. Owners who chase crowd size instead of spend per guest are frequently the ones who look busiest right up until the month they suddenly can't make rent. There's a related trap hiding inside staffing costs too. Nightclubs run on a heavily variable labor model, meaning most of your staff are scheduled shift by shift based on projected attendance rather than working fixed salaried hours. Which sounds efficient on paper because you're theoretically only paying for labor when you actually need it. In practice, that same flexibility makes payroll one of the hardest costs in the business to forecast accurately, because a promoter's guest list falling through at the last minute, bad weather on a Saturday, or a competing event opening 2 blocks away can all turn a fully staffed, fully stocked night into a break-even or losing one, with the labor cost already locked in whether the room fills up or not. To understand why the industry works the way it does today, you have to go back to Studio 54, and specifically to Steve Rubell, who co-founded the club with his business partner Ian Schrager. Studio 54 opened on April 26, 1977, in New York City, inside a converted opera house and former CBS television studio on West 54th Street, which is where the club took its name. What Rubell understood, and what permanently reshaped nightlife economics far beyond his own club, wasn't the music or the interior design, it was the door. Rubell personally stood at the entrance most nights and curated the crowd by hand, one person at a time, deliberately mixing celebrities, completely unknown regular people, and eccentric characters together, while turning away wealthy patrons and expensive clothes if he felt they simply didn't fit the particular mix he wanted inside that night. That decision, treating admission itself as a curated creative act rather than a straightforward transaction that anyone with money could simply purchase, is the origin point of the velvet rope model that nearly every modern club, whether its owners realize it or not, still operates on today. The scarcity of getting in became the actual product, more valuable in the customer's mind than anything happening on the dance floor once they were inside. And it's the reason door policy at premium venues today is still treated as a marketing tool in its own right, not merely a formality for managing capacity. But Studio 54's story is also the clearest possible illustration of the industry's deepest structural risk, which is the temptation to run large amounts of the business in cash, off the books, to avoid taxes on margins that already look razor-thin on paper. Nightclubs generate enormous volumes of small cash transactions, at the door and at the bar, night after night, and that fundamental characteristic makes them uniquely vulnerable to exactly this kind of shortfall between real revenue and reported revenue, and uniquely expose the moment regulators come looking closely. This is precisely what brought Studio 54 down. In December of 1978, federal agents raided the club's offices as part of an Internal Revenue Service investigation into unreported income. Investigators uncovered records indicating the club had been skimming a substantial portion of its cash revenue rather than reporting it accurately. Rubell and Schrager were subsequently indicted, and in 1980 they pleaded guilty to federal charges connected to tax evasion and skimming profits from the business. Both men were sentenced to 3.5 years in federal prison and were also ordered to pay significant financial penalties. They ultimately served roughly 13 months at a federal prison camp before being released. Studio 54 itself closed not long after the case broke publicly, holding its final party in February of 1980, less than 3 years after it had opened as the most famous nightclub in the world, at the absolute peak of its cultural influence. The lesson embedded in that timeline is structural, not merely personal. When your industry's core cost structure depends on cash flowing through a door and a bar with minimal paper trail behind it, the same low-friction cash flow that makes the margins work in the first place is also exactly what puts the entire operation one government audit away from complete collapse. Modern point-of-sale systems and card payments have reduced how much of a typical club's revenue moves as pure untracked cash compared to the late 1970s. But the underlying structural vulnerability hasn't disappeared. It's just shifted form, showing up today in disputes over reported tip income, under-the-table promoter payments, and cash-heavy bottle service transactions that regulators and tax authorities still flag as higher-risk categories for exactly the same reasons they flagged Studio 54 nearly 5 decades ago. After Rubell and Schrager were released from prison, they didn't go back to running nightclubs. Instead, they moved into boutique hotels, opening Morgan's Hotel in New York in the early 1980s, applying the same curated, image-driven sensibility that had made the door of Studio 54 so powerful, but this time to a hospitality model built on real estate they actually held long-term. That pivot itself tells you something important about where the more durable money in this world eventually tends to go, not the volatile, cash-heavy, license-dependent nightclub model, but a more stable, asset-backed hospitality model, where the value sits in the building itself rather than in a single night's door. Which brings us to the bigger disruption reshaping the entire nightclub industry today, well beyond any single club's individual mistakes, changing consumer habits, particularly among younger adults. Alcohol consumption among younger drinkers has been declining for years now, and going out specifically to stand in a crowded room and pay a cover charge has been competing for that same block of a Friday night against cheaper, more controllable alternatives, from streaming entertainment to social apps that let people curate an entire social evening without ever leaving the couch. Industry operators have also had to contend with steadily rising insurance and security costs, along with cities tightening noise and occupancy enforcement in gentrifying neighborhoods, where new residential towers increasingly sit directly next to nightlife districts that predate them by decades. The clubs that have actually survived this shift are, almost without exception, the ones that diversified their revenue well beyond the traditional late-night dance floor model. Groups like TAO Group Hospitality, which operates a portfolio of nightlife and dining venues including TAO, Marquee, and Lovo across several major cities, built their business around bundling restaurants, daytime pool club events, and nightclubs together under the same brand and frequently the same physical footprint, so a single piece of expensive real estate earns revenue across lunch, dinner, and late night, instead of relying entirely on one narrow, unpredictable window on Friday and Saturday. Other operators leaned harder into experiential production instead, treating the club less like a bar with music playing and more like a live entertainment venue built around a resident DJ residency model, essentially licensing a famous performer's name the way a hotel might license a celebrity chef, guaranteeing a baseline level of demand that doesn't depend entirely on any single night's unpredictable walk-in door numbers. The clubs that didn't adapt, the ones still betting everything on cover charge and walk-in bar sales with no diversified income stream at all, have been the ones most likely to quietly close, often not with any dramatic public collapse, but simply with a lease that quietly doesn't get renewed. Some operators pushed the diversification even further, moving away from the traditional midnight-to-close model entirely and toward daytime programming, brunch service, private corporate events, and rentable event space during hours, when a traditional nightclub would otherwise sit dark and unused. A room that only earns money for 8 hours a week, Friday and Saturday night, is carrying the same fixed rent as a room earning money 7 days a week, and in an environment where rent, insurance, and labor costs have all been rising steadily, that 7-day model has become less a creative flourish and more a basic survival requirement for staying open at all. So here are your two futures if you actually go through with this. In the optimistic scenario, you land a location inside a genuinely undersaturated nightlife district. You secure your liquor license early, before the local market tightens and prices climb. You build a table and bottle service program that keeps your revenue per guest consistently high even on slower midweek nights. And you diversify into brunch or dinner service so your fixed rent is effectively being paid across 3 separate revenue windows instead of one narrow one. Do that well for 3 to 5 consecutive years, and you can build something that either sells for a meaningful multiple of its annual profit to a larger hospitality group, or that becomes a stable, recognizable brand you're able to replicate in a second city entirely. In the realistic bad year scenario, a single noise complaint from a new residential building next door triggers a full city review of your occupancy permit, your insurance premium jumps sharply after one incident on your record, a slow winter quarter leaves you unable to cover rent while still carrying a full staff, and you discover the hard way that the 6-figure liquor license you paid a premium for isn't something you can simply resell for what you originally paid, if the local market has since loosened and new licenses are suddenly being issued again. Both of these futures exist inside the exact same building, the exact same license, and the exact same opening night crowd cheering as you cut the ribbon. The only real difference between them is what happens after the first year, once the free publicity fades and the actual numbers finally start talking. Every operator who has lasted more than 5 years in this business will tell you the same thing in different words. The opening night is the easiest night you will ever have, because it's the only night the room fills itself. You didn't really buy a nightclub, you bought a license to sell scarcity. One table, one bottle, one night at a time, and the moment people stop believing your door is worth waiting behind, that's the moment the whole business, not just the party, is over.